Hey guys, it's Melanie from MelanieKhan.com. Welcome back to my channel. Today's video, we're going to be making a tote bag. Now on my Learn to Sew email list, which you can still join if you want to, I send out little sewing tip emails here and there. I asked you guys to vote on the next Learn to Sew tutorial, and overwhelmingly, y'all voted for a tote bag. So that is today's video. This tote bag has it all. We've got different types of handles. We've got pockets. We've got French seams. I promise they sound fancy, but they're not hard at all. Tons of options, really economical way to make a gorgeous tote bag, quick and easy, basic for my beginners out there. So let's get going. I'm gonna show you how to make it. Okay, here is what you need for our perfect tote bag. A 1/2 yard of your outer fabric and a 1/2 yard of your lining. So I am using a canvas. So this is a nice, thick, sturdy canvas for our outer. This is cut 18 inches wide by 36 inches long. And when you cut it, so if your 18 inches is your width, right, because it's a 1/2 yard of fabric so that you won't have any waste, you're gonna have about this much left over, and you can use that for a pocket, or you can use that for straps. And I'll go over that when we get to that section, but hang on to that. You'll also have some leftover lining, so you can utilize those for pockets or straps if you need to. I am also though gonna use this webbing, which is a really great and very sturdy way to do a tote bag. So I'm gonna show you both, but if you can't find this, you don't need to get extra. You can utilize your fabric and make straps. This is my sample, so this is kind of what it would look like if you used the remainder of your lining fabric to make your straps. And then you need coordinating thread and various other sewing supplies like we've been using in this Learn to Sew series, so nothing extra fancy that you need at all. First thing that we need to do after we have our cut piece of outer fabric is to press our short side. So this is my 18-inch side. I'm going to fold that over 1/4 inch and then an additional 1 inch, and that is going to be this top hem. And then over an additional inch, roughly, you can measure this. Just make sure that it's the same on both sides. All right, so I'm just verifying that it's the same size. Okay, we can set this aside for now. Now I want you to decide if you want to have a pocket on your lining or not. Totally optional, you do not need to do it. Here's my pocket piece. I cut it 9 by 6. So roughly that size. You've got plenty of extra fabric. And I cut it so that the lines were going a different direction than the outer piece. So what I'm gonna do is actually take this over to the sewing machine and I'm gonna zigzag all the way around it. That way we don't have any fraying. That way this can be completely washable. So let's go ahead and go zigzag it. Okay, once it's zigzagged all the way around, we need to press it and decide what's gonna be your top. I'm gonna have this be my top. So I'm gonna fold that over a little wider. And then we need to press the rest of the way around also. So I'm actually gonna flip this so that the top is on the outer piece. And I'm gonna take this over to the sewing machine and do 2 stitches along the top just to add that extra finished touch. And then we will pin it to our lining. I have my lining here and I'm gonna find the center of my lining. I made a little crease, find the center of my pocket, and I'm going to pin the pocket into place about 4 inches down from the top. And so then what we're gonna do is, the top is finished, so we're gonna sew along the side, bottom, back up the other side, back stitching at the beginning and the end. So let's head over to the sewing machine. All right, here's our lining with our pocket. We've got our outer fabric. And what we're gonna do is slide our lining up underneath this lip that we made. And we're gonna get it laid out for the entire bag. Then come over here. Your lining might be a little long. I had you actually cut it slightly longer than you needed just in case you had any mistakes. We definitely don't want this to be too short. So you might need to trim off about 1 inch or so from this edge, just to make sure that both sides, depending on how large your hem was, both sides are large enough for your lining to slide underneath. So once that's slid under, we're going to pin it all into place. Okay, this is the point at which we need to add our straps. So if you went ahead and got webbing, you can just skip right to the next spot because we're going to slide these underneath in the right spot and then get to sewing. If you need to make your straps, I'm going to walk you through that really quick here. So this is the rest of my fabric. Going to be 18 inches wide, remember, because that's how large the cut was. So we are going to need 4 strips that are 2 inches. Okay, so we had our 4 2-inch strips from our lining, and if you have a print, you need to place your right sides together and then take it over to the sewing machine and just sew down either side. Then you'll need to flip it. So these are pretty wide straps. Flipping it is pretty easy once you get going. Okay, so you'll flip it right side out, press it, and then stitch back down along the sides like this. Just right there along that edge. Make sure everything's nice and pressed. And then you're going to do the next step with our straps the exact same way, whether you use webbing or your fabric straps like this. You need your handles to be between 25 and 28 inches. Around there is fine. And then what we're going to do is slide it in to that hem also, okay? Make sure that it's straight. And I like to put it about 4 inches from the side. So 4 inches from the edge to the outer edge of our strap. Tuck it under there, pin it. You can also clip it. Do the exact same thing on the other side. Once those are pinned, we need to sew it along this fold, so pretty close along that edge over the sewing machine. So let's head there. And I'm going to sew pretty close along this fold, just a straight stitch all the way down. When you get to the strap, just make sure it's straight and it's not getting pulled over. Before you even do the other side, we're going to flip up our strap, kind of crease it and fold it over. I'm going to clip it into place. Now I'm going to flip the bag over and I'm going to sew along this side, and I'm going to sew another stitch along the bottom about 1/8 inch away from this one, and then one along the top to secure those straps really well. We're going to do our side seams now. We're actually in the home stretch. We're almost done with this bag. We're going to do French seams here on the sides. And so what we're going to do first is sew. It seems counterintuitive because it's the French seam, but it's not scary, I promise. So we're going to sew along the right side, then we're going to flip it and sew along the wrong side. But one of the steps that makes this process a little bit easier is evening up our sides. So on one side I have my lining that's a little bit larger. It's not really that much smaller over on this side, but just getting those edges really even is one of those steps that just is an extra step, but it makes the process a lot easier. So I want you to lay everything out, make sure that the lining is nice and like laid in here nice and flat. There's no big bubbles or wrinkles. Everything along the top is lined up. Our strap, the top edge of our bag, everything is nice and good to go. And then before I move anything, I'm gonna pin it or clip it. Okay, now over the sewing machine, we are gonna sew down both sides with 1/4 inch seam allowance. Let's go do it. Back stitch. If you have any discrepancies now on this side, now is the time. You can also trim at this step. You could trim it down to 3/8 inch or about 1/4 inch. If there's any like lots of fraying or you had something kind of slip or you didn't do the last step, now is the time to trim that seam. So now we're gonna flip it wrong side out. Want to make sure everything's looking good. All right, I'm just popping those corners out, and any little threads that are coming through here, I'm gonna get rid of those now. And then we need to press these side seams. So we're gonna press these side seams really well, and then we're gonna go back through the sewing machine from this side and sew it back down. So that's what the French seam is. It's a really nice way to finish your seams, really sturdy and surprisingly easy. I know it's because it's French, it sounds fancy, but it's not. You want everything to be nice and flat. It's helpful if you kind of roll this in your fingers. And then I'm gonna put clips back on here because I want that seam to really stay put. Do the same thing on the other side seam. Now we need to make sure that we catch all of that stuff we did on the right side, on the outer part of our bag. Needs to make sure that it's gonna get caught up in those seams. Otherwise, when you flip it right side out, you're gonna see the edge of that raw fabric, and you don't want that. So we're gonna move our needle position back over, slightly over 1/2 inch seam allowance, just to make sure. We don't want any of those threads coming through. Otherwise, you'll have to unpick this whole seam and redo it. So we're gonna sew down the side, back stitching really well at the beginning and the end. You can be done here if you are going to be carrying books or magazines or things that are flat. You can totally be done here. See if any of those fabrics are popping through here, that's what you would want to fix. But because we did that extra trimming, not a factor. I'm going to show you how to box it out. All right, if you want to see my bigger version of this, you could go check it out on my blog. This is the size I wanted to show you because it's 18 inches. It's a really economical way to make these because you just need 1/2 yard of fabric. But if you want a nice big bad boy, then I'll show you that on my blog. So what we're going to do with this box out is the same way in theory that we did it initially. So I'm just making a little crease here along the bottom because we want to line up this crease with this seam. And that seems a little bulky in there, so we want to just take that into consideration. And I'm going to make a line 3.5 inches across. I like a little bit bigger box. If you want a smaller box and you can play with that number, I'm going to do 3.5. Need a marking tool. You're going to sew along this line so you're not going to see it if you only have like a regular pen or pencil. So this is 3.5 inches. Pin that into place, and we want to just make sure there's no wrinkles or anything happening along the back side. Just double check that. Do the same thing on the other side. And you also want to make sure there's no wrinkles or anything happening on the inside. On the inside of mine just now, there was like a little wrinkle and it was having trouble laying flat. So another thing to watch out for. Now we're going to go and sew directly down those lines. Okay, so now we need to trim this tip off. So we're going to cut it with, less than 1/4 inch if you can, because we're going to pull that inside and make our new French seam again. So we don't want it too large or it's going to have threads and fabric edges coming through. Careful over that bulky seam. Okay, now we're going to pull that into the lining. Here's how it looks on the inside. Pop out those corners, and you can press it if you want to, although I found that a good finger press with a clip is doing just fine. All right, now again, slightly larger than 1/2 inch seam allowance. This center seam is pretty bulky, so just go slow over that. My machine's been having no problem going through all those layers, because even though this canvas is thicker, it's still really easy to sew with. Make sure you back stitch at this part. Double check that, make sure it's looking really good. All right, let's go take a look. All right, here we go. Got our nice little pocket. Got our box out. Here's how it looks on this side. It looks really good. I'll get some better glam shots with it full so you can kind of see the scale. But there we have it. The perfect tote bag tutorial. Enjoy!